Well, thank you, Brock Williams, for just officially tearing me up with that sincere prayer. I appreciate that. And then just walks off stage and leaves me here crying. And he did that in the first service. And guys, it took me a while to get my composure. And I want to tell you, I am messed up this morning. I mean, I'm messed up, Pat. I want to confess to you why. I just feel God. You ever just been in a situation like that where you just feel Him and you know He's near and I've been there this morning. I am there. You know what I'm saying? And so I just get emotional when that happens. And Brock said, could you think of one thing you're grateful for, one thing? Well, I'll tell you one thing I'm grateful for, is that when we assemble together at Go to Church, God is among us, that He's active in our church. You know what church without God is? It's boring, baby. It is boring as all get out. You know what church with God is? It is a blessing. Man, it is completely different. And I love the fact, and I'm grateful for the fact, that we feel God in our midst. Oh, man, Burl. Be patient with me. This morning I'm going to do sermon number 9 in a series of sermons that revolve around the life of a young man named Joseph. And to do this series where it should be, I got to do just a brief recap, okay? So bear with me. I think if you haven't been here, you're not familiar with the story, when Joseph was 17 years old, he experienced 2 dreams that were divine in origin. And God, through these dreams, showed Joseph a little bit about His plan for Joseph's life. He showed him that one day, son, you're going to be a very powerful person. Some kind of ruler. I got to believe I think you would be, that Joseph was pretty excited about that revelation. Life was already pretty good for Joseph, and now it appeared the sky is the limit. Until his 10 older brothers sold him to slave traders that carried him far, far away to the land of Egypt. Thanks to his brothers, Joseph literally lost everything. For the next decade, Joseph served in the home of an Egyptian man named Potiphar. It didn't take Potiphar long to recognize that Joseph was an exceptional young man. And so he promoted him again and again until in time Joseph was the administrator or manager of Potiphar's entire estate. And then just when it appeared things were going well for Joseph, he was done wrong once again. His master's wife accused him of rape. He, of course, was innocent. However, he ended up being sentenced to jail for the remainder of his life, even though he didn't commit the crime. While in prison, Joseph met a man. We talked about him last week. He was a cupbearer for Pharaoh. And this man had connections. He had all the connections needed in order to get Joseph out of prison. And Joseph did this guy a huge favor and then asked in turn, I want you to do me a favor and use those connections to get me out of jail, out of Egypt, and back home to my daddy. Well, it didn't happen. This man forgot all about Joseph. And having been forgotten, Joseph spent 2 more years in prison, and that's where we're picking up on our story today. Joseph is 30 years old. And it's been 13 years since he had those dreams. I want you to think about this. 13 long, difficult, disappointing, confusing years. It would appear to us that Joseph's journey had led him far from the throne that he had seen in his dreams. Think about Joseph's resume for just a moment. If there was somebody out there looking to fill the position of king, and Joseph's resume came across their desk, think about how it would read. I spent a decade as a slave in a man's home, and after 10 years of hard work, he just let me go. I've been accused and found guilty of attempted rape, and I'm currently a convict. Now, if you saw that resume, would you naturally think, now that guy is a natural-born leader, huh? Now that's the kind of man we're looking for to take the helm of our country. No. No one in the right mind would look at that resume and consider Joseph for a leadership position. He couldn't have been further away from the fulfillment of his dreams, right? Wrong. Joseph couldn't have known this, but he was right on the brink of seeing his dreams come true. This long, difficult, disappointing, confusing path had led him exactly where God wanted him to be. And then one day, probably just an average day like any other day, some members of Pharaoh's guard came down into the dungeon. In my mind, Joey, I kind of picture they had some official-looking documents and they gave it to the warden. And perhaps the warden kind of looked over in Joseph's direction and pointed out and said, that's him. That's who you're talking about. The guards quickly approached Joseph and requested that he come with them. And I can kind of hear Joseph asking, where are you taking me? And they said, Pharaoh. Pharaoh himself has asked to see you. He wants to speak with you. Maybe Joseph's mind is spinning at that point. He's thinking to himself, Pharaoh? Why would Pharaoh want to talk with me? And perhaps you are asking the same question. Genesis 41, we discover that at this point in Joseph's life, that his nightmare is ending because Pharaoh is having some nightmares of his own. Pharaoh had two dreams that shook him. The first dream, the Bible tells us that Pharaoh in his dream was standing on the banks of the Nile River. I can see him there standing with a cup of coffee, looking out over the water, and in his dream, Pam, 7 cows came up out of the river and walked onto the bank. Aqua cows? I don't know. 7 cows came out of the water, walked up on the bank, and in Pharaoh's dream, these cows were sleek, fat, and healthy, and they began to graze on the marsh grass. And as he saw this in his dream, he said, then there are 7 more cows that came out of the water, and they were skinny. They appeared to be starving. And these skinny cows walked up next to the fat cows, and they ate them. The skinny cows devoured the fat cows. And it shook Pharaoh, so I could just see him kind of jumping off of the bed. He's in a cold sweat, trembling. It shook him up, Donna. I'm not sure I understand exactly why, but it did. Well, eventually he lay back down. He has another dream. And in this dream, there are 7 healthy, plump heads of grain on a single stalk. And then all of a sudden, that stalk produced 7 more heads of grain that the Bible said were withered. And as he watched these withered heads devoured the plump, healthy heads of grain, and once again, it scared him, and he woke up. So the next day, he's struggling. He's like, I think there's some significance to these dreams. I'm not sure what it is. So he called in his magicians. And he called in his wise men. And he said, I've had a couple of dreams. I really didn't know what they mean. So he shared the dreams with these guys and said, okay, guys, tell me what do they mean. And they look at one another going, I don't know. And the Bible said that the cupbearer, the guy who had forgotten Joseph, is standing there. And he was reminded. And I think last week we agreed, probably not by something, but someone. And he was reminded of Joseph. And can you see, he's in the room with all these powerful men. And the cupbearer, I can just see him go, man, I hate to butt in, but I feel like I need to say something, and it's pretty important. Pharaoh, 2 years ago, you threw me in jail. And one night I had a dream that disturbed me the way these dreams have disturbed you. And I needed to know the meaning, and there was a young Hebrew man there, and I shared my dream with him. And he shared the interpretation, and things happened exactly as he said. You know what Pharaoh said? Go get that man. Bring him to me. And so that's why the guards had shown up, and they were taking Joseph to meet with Pharaoh. Now, before he could meet with him, he had to take a shower, he had to shave, and they put clean clothes on him. They had to make him presentable, I guess, for his meeting with Pharaoh. And as Joseph's abroad, and he's got his meeting with Pharaoh, I want you to look what transpired. Genesis 41, verse 15 and 16. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can. You see those two words because they're significant to what we're going to learn. He said, I heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. Look how Joseph responds. It is beyond my power to do this. Now, I would have said it more simply. I'd have said, I can't. You know, I'm sorry, I hear what you're saying, but I can't do that. I can't, Joseph replied. I love what he said here. But God can. I can't. But God can. God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. He said, so shoot, Pharaoh, tell me the dreams. Pharaoh told him the dreams. Joseph said, oh man, that's easy. Those two dreams actually mean the same thing. The 7 fat cows represent 7 prosperous years, as do the 7 plump, healthy heads of grain. They represent 7 prosperous years. The skinny cows, the withered heads of grain, they represent 7 lean years, years of severe famine. That's what they represent. And here is what is about to take place. Your country is about to experience 7 extremely prosperous years, bumper crops, record harvest. But it's going to be followed by a 7-year famine that is so severe that you will forget those prosperous years. And if something isn't done, Egypt's not going to survive. What's happening is God is showing you in advance what's going to take place. And the reason He gave you 2 dreams was to confirm to you that what's about to take place is going to unfold quickly. Boom. So here you got the slave, alleged rapist, convict. He's talking to the most powerful men in the civilized world. Now, before they could dismiss him and send him back to the dungeon, he said, and oh yeah, guys, what? Who is this guy? He said, oh yeah, guys, I just want to tell you what I would do if I were in your shoes. I would pick a man of incredible intelligence and wisdom, and I would put him on the point. As a matter of fact, Pharaoh, I'd put him in charge of my country. And then I would appoint supervisors throughout the land of Egypt, and during these 7 prosperous years, I would collect 20% of the harvest, and I would put it in the king's granaries, and I would post a guard around it. And during the 7 years of famine, I would live off of that, and if you'll do as I say, you will survive. How do you think Pharaoh would respond to that? Like, who asked you? Who asked your opinion? Jailbird. I want you to see how Pharaoh responds to it. Chapter 41, verse 37. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. Can you see Pharaoh looking around going, what are you guys thinking? And they're going, hey, sounds good to me. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? What was it Potiphar recognized about Joseph? God's with him. What's Pharaoh recognizing? God's with him. Can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? You know what we're learning? Pharaoh is considering Joseph for the position. Are you kidding me? He said, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one is as intelligent or wise as you are. Look at the next statement. You will be in charge. It didn't take long for Joseph when he was in Potiphar's house to end up in charge. It didn't take long for him in the prison to be in charge. One meeting with Pharaoh and he is in charge. I find that fascinating. He said, you'll be in charge of my court and a small constituency of my people who are going to work directly with you to help bring about this. What does that say? All my people. You're going to be in charge. You're going to be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Think about this. In Potiphar's house, he was in charge, but he was number 2. In the prison, he was in charge, but number 2. And now he is going to be in Egypt in charge, second chair. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge. I think we're getting it, Pharaoh. I think we're getting it. Of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. You know what the signet ring was? It was the king's. It really basically was the same as, I'll give you my signature. I'm giving you my authority. If you want it, get it. If you give an order, they're going to follow it. I'm putting you in this position, and I'm giving you all the authority you're going to need to do what I'm telling you to do. So then he dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck, king bling, I guess. And then he made Joseph ride in a chariot reserved for the second in command, and wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. I think this is so cool. So they got this chariot. It's got to be something special. You know what I mean? It's got to be something special. It's not a 91 Honda Accord. I'm telling you, this was a big deal. And everybody associated this chariot with the prince. And I think word had gotten out. Pharaoh has appointed a guy to be the prince of Egypt now. And so anywhere Joseph went, riding around in this really deluxe chariot, somebody went before him yelling, kneel down, bow the knee, pay your respects to the new prince. I got to thinking about that. I got to picturing Potiphar's wife. Maybe she and old Potiphar been out shopping. They're walking down the street. They're headed to their favorite coffee shop, and they hear this voice crying out, kneel down, bow the knee. The prince is coming. Can you see them bow down? I see them look up, and who would have ever believed it? It was Joseph. I think there's a quick lesson in that for us. I think we need to be careful how we treat people, right? And so Joseph is in the prison, and Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. Then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name. You ready? Here we go. Zaphanath-Paneah. What's wrong with Joseph? What's wrong with that name? I mean, that's pretty simple. Joe, come here. Word. Now it's Zaphanath-Paneah. I love the name. You know what it means? It means God lives and God speaks. You know who came up with that name? A pagan man. A pagan man that would have known God from a goose. But when he looked at Joseph, he had to acknowledge something. There's a God who lives. I see him in that boy. And there's a God who speaks. I hear him when that boy talks. Wow, man, God, if I could ask you for one thing, this is what I'd love, is that when I have an encounter with people and they walk away, I'd love for them to say, well, I can tell you this. There's a God who lives. I see him in Ronnie. There's a God who speaks. I hear him when he speaks. That's why he changed his name. And look at this. He also gave him a woman. No more lonely nights for old Joseph. She was the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. So what happened? Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. In other words, it's time to get going. Let's see what I've inherited. Let's see what I got to do. Can you believe this? Suddenly, just as suddenly as the nightmare began, it ended. And Joseph's dreams came true. He wasn't just released from prison. He went from a prison cell all the way to a throne. Now, honey, that's a promotion. He was no longer a convict. He was a prince. He was the prince of Egypt. I don't know how Joseph imagined this would happen, but I promise you it was better than anything he ever imagined. It was like a dam broke, just releasing a flood of blessings into his life. The last 13 years had probably moved at the pace of cold molasses. But now everything is moving so quickly, I believe Joseph's head is spinning. How do you explain this dramatic reversal of fortune? How do you explain so many good things happening to Joseph so quickly? There's only one explanation. God. God made this happen. The same God who put the dreams in Joseph's heart had now made the dreams come true. What do we learn from this story? Man, we learn a lot. But we're not going to get into those lessons this morning, okay? I'll tell you why. Preacher Ronnie's got a question. Why now? Why didn't God do this sooner? Why did God make Joseph wait? And in particular, why did he make him wait those last 2 years? I think the answer might be simple. The timing wasn't right. You know why the timing wasn't right? Joseph wasn't ready. There was something critically important that was missing in Joseph's life. At the 11-year mark of Joseph's suffering, it's easy to see that God had been at work in Joseph. His character had evolved nicely. We see splashes of wisdom, humility, compassion, unselfishness, and integrity. His skill set was obviously developing. He excelled at leadership, organization, and management. So what was missing? Well, missing might not be the right word. There was a critical area of Joseph's life that needed more work before he could ever take the throne. There was a critical area of Joseph's life that needed more work before he could ever take the throne. Faith. His faith needed a little work. Joseph had some faith before his suffering began. He demonstrated some faith during his suffering. However, to be what God wanted him to be and to do what God was calling him to do, he needed more faith. God made Joseph wait those last 2 years so that he could build his faith. Can I show you what I'm talking about? When Joseph met the cupbearer, he took the initiative and he told the cupbearer what he was going to do. You're going to mention me to Pharaoh. You're going to tell him that I was kidnapped. You're going to tell him that I've been done wrong, didn't do anything to deserve to be in this prison, and you're going to tell him all this in order that he would get me out of here. He told him everything he could do. Joseph tried to make something happen, and that's always the evidence of weak faith. Did you hear me? When God is calling on us to wait and we decide we're going to make something happen, that's the evidence of weak faith. Two years later, Joseph was given the opportunity to meet and converse with Pharaoh. Did you notice that he didn't tell Pharaoh his story? Now, he had a chance. Listen, he had a chance. He's standing right in front of Pharaoh. He mentioned nothing about being kidnapped. He didn't try to prove his innocence. He didn't plead for a pardon and a release. Never mentioned it. He told Pharaoh, you need a guy on point. You need a leader. But he didn't say, and by the way, I hate to be self-promoting, but I had these dreams 13 years ago. And man, for the past 13 years, I've been knocking it out of the park in management level positions. He didn't do it. Mark, he didn't do it. He didn't try to make anything happen. Yes, why not, Ronnie? I mean, had he just given up? No, that's not it at all. What was different? Joseph's faith was different. His faith had grown to the point that he was now trusting completely in God. He didn't feel like he had to be in control because he knew God was in control. He didn't feel like he had to figure out the next move because he already knew God knows the next move. He didn't feel like he had to make something happen because he knew this. God alone is going to make something happen, and whatever he makes happen is fine by me. Joseph was no longer relying on himself. He was relying completely on God. That's faith. Joseph was at ease, relaxed, and at peace with whatever happened. That's faith. Joseph was resting in the confidence that his life was in the hands of a good God. That's faith. And where in the world? You want a little more faith? Could you use some of that? Where in the world did Joseph find all this additional faith? He found it in a dark, dismal dungeon. He found it while waiting on God. God built Joseph's faith by making him wait. God used suffering to build Joseph's character, but he used time to build Joseph's faith. As Joseph waited in the prison those last 2 years, something happened. Something painful but wonderful happened. Joseph's self-confidence died. When Joseph met the cupbearer, he was confident, I can make this happen. However, when he saw his best efforts fail miserably, his self-confidence died. I want you to think back to Joseph's conversation with Pharaoh. When Pharaoh said, I hear you can. What did he say? I can't. You know what that tells me? Self-confidence gone. Joseph wasn't relying on his ingenuity, skills, experience, or persuasiveness anymore. And this was a necessary step in the development of his faith in God. Once his faith in himself was dead, then his faith in God could be resurrected. Think about Joseph's conversation with Pharaoh again. Joseph said, I can't, but I know somebody can. God can. Joseph apparently looked around one day and realized no one can end my sufferings. No one can make my dreams come true, not even Pharaoh. Only God can do that. Having nowhere else to place his faith, Joseph placed his faith in God alone. Now, he's ready for the throne. Okay. What about you? Me? What are we learning in this story? In particular, what do we learn about God? I promised you this. I probably got 6 minutes, okay? But we're now talking about you. And I want you to listen very carefully. Here's what we learn in this story. God is working while we're waiting. I told you last week that I'd answer the question, why does God make us wait? Well, now you know. When we look around our life and it appears that God isn't working for us, rest assured He's working in us. You got to make sure you get that. When you and I look around our life and it appears that God isn't working for us, I promise you He's working in us. While we wait, God is shaping our character and refining skills. But while we wait, God is also building our faith. You say, how so, Ronnie? He is busy removing every shred of self-confidence from us. You say, how? Hey, here's what we know about humans. You know it about you from personal experience. I know it about me from my personal experience. I know about it, all of us, just from reading the Bible. There is no human being alive that enjoys waiting. And so what do we do when God puts us on hold and we're in a situation where all we can do is wait on Him? I promise you there'll be at some point where we're going to take the situation in our own hands and we're going to try to make something happen. Self-confidence. I can do this. I can manage this. I can handle this. I will pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I'll work harder. I'll work longer. I can do this. And you know what happens? Time after time after time, our best efforts fail. And with every failure, a little more of our self-confidence dies until it's dead. And we acknowledge before God, you know what? I can't. Man, that's a good place to be. Getting there can be painful and time-consuming, but we will never place our faith in God as we should as long as we have an unhealthy faith in ourselves. Recognizing our helplessness is a healthy first step, but you can't stop there. The confidence that you once had in yourself, you got to place in God. Therefore, let me tell you what God will do. As you and I are waiting, yes, He is busy killing our self-confidence, but He will allow the circumstances of our lives to evolve into full-blown impossibilities so that we recognize something. I can't get myself out of this. Pete can't get me out of this. Jane can't get me out of this. Nobody can get me out of this. If I'm getting out of this one, I've got one option. God. He alone can get me out of this. Hopefully at that point, we move our faith where it should be, and that is squarely on Him. You understand that while we're waiting, God's got us in a process of moving from an I can mentality to an I can't, but He can mentality. Now, if you're waiting on God, there are two things I want to encourage you to do. Number one, stop looking within and start looking up. I'm speaking to someone here this morning who's been waiting on God for a long time, and you are frustrated and you are exhausted. You've tried multiple times to make something happen, and yet you find yourself today still waiting. Even now, you're desperately trying to figure out what your next move is. I'm going to make a suggestion. Why don't you stop looking within for answers and solutions? Rather than looking within, why don't you try looking up? I strongly suspect that your circumstances are beyond you. But they are not beyond God. Why don't you take a break and just put this situation squarely and firmly in the hands of God? Like Joseph, it might be time for you to admit, I can't do this. That's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. And it can be so liberating. I'm going to say something, and I hope this doesn't offend you. You've already proven that you can't fix this. So why don't you give God a chance? Give Him time and see what He does. Second thing, stop looking around and start looking up. Perhaps you're looking to others the way Joseph looked to the cupbearer. You're looking for someone to bail you out, someone to open the right doors and escort you out of a long, difficult situation. You ask, Ronnie, don't you think God does use people to end our suffering and help our dreams become reality? Well, sure He does. However, I want you to be fair with people. If God's schedule requires that you wait, there's nothing that anyone can do to change that. Nothing. So be careful. Don't place unrealistic expectations on others. Just let people be people and let God be God. I'm going to tell you something else, and I hope it doesn't depress you. I'm talking to multiple people here this morning, and there's only one way out of the situation you're in, and that's God. So stop looking within or looking around and start looking up to the one who can deliver you. Put your faith in God now, not later. Like Joseph, I want you to trust Him while you're waiting. Rely totally on Him. Rest in the fact that your life is in the hands of a good God. And when the time is right, when you're ready, God will end your wait. And His dreams for you will come true. Let's pray together. God, I guess the hardest thing you've ever asked me to do is wait. Sometimes I deal pretty good with pain, loss. But I don't remember a time, Lord, when I dealt well with waiting. And I believe with all my heart, I'm speaking to somebody here this morning who's a lot like me. And God, they've been waiting on you in regard to some important area of their life for a long, long, long time. I pray that this morning they will recognize something, that while they're waiting, you've been working. You're working in them. Your goal is to give them something that's going to really make their lives so much better. A mature faith. I pray that they'll trust you, God, while they wait. While they're waiting, I want them to trust you. And as they do, I want them to find rest, peace, joy. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving week.